What if I told you that the greatest untapped medicine for women over 50 has nothing to do with prescriptions or expensive creams, yet it has been kept from you for most of your life? Imagine discovering that the very thing you were taught was shameful is in fact the key to better sleep, calmer moods, and renewed energy. If you're ready to uncover these transformative truths, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Be sure to turn on the notification bell so you never miss another honest health conversation designed especially for women over 50. Now, let's step into the very first secret. Dr. Rachel Meyers stood on the second-floor balcony of her new clinic, breathing in the crisp, salty air that drifted up from the Havenwood harbor. Below, the water shimmered under the morning sun, and the gentle rhythm of waves lapping against the docks was a soothing counterpoint to the distant cry of gulls. The small coastal town was a world away from the relentless concrete and shrieking sirens of the city she had left behind, a life she had shed like a heavy, worn-out coat. After 2 decades of practice, she had grown weary of the impersonal machinery of modern medicine. The 15-minute appointments that felt more like transactions, the reflexive reach for a prescription pad to solve problems that ran deeper than any pill could touch, and the subtle, constant dismissal of women's deeper concerns. Here, in this quiet harbor town, she was building something different. Not just a practice, but a sanctuary. Her clinic, the Havenwood Women's Wellness Center, was a meticulously restored Victorian house, painted a calming sea glass green, nestled among ancient oak trees, whose branches reached out like protective arms. It was more home than hospital. She had poured her savings and her heart into every detail, choosing soft, indirect lighting, deep armchairs upholstered in velvet, and walls adorned with art that celebrated the female form in all its seasons, the budding of youth, the full bloom of motherhood, and the powerful, textured beauty of age. She wanted any woman who walked through her door to feel her shoulders drop, to take a deep breath, and to feel, perhaps for the first time, that this was a place where she could be truly heard. Her first few weeks were unnervingly quiet. Havenwood was a tight-knit community, its families intertwined through generations. The women were polite, offering reserved smiles at the local market, but they were accustomed to the familiar routine of driving an hour to the city for their medical needs. Rachel began to feel a familiar prickle of doubt. In her desire to escape the city's frantic pace, had she instead found a place so settled in its ways that there was no room for her? Determined to connect, she arranged to give a free monthly wellness talk at the town library, a charming brick building that smelled of old paper and lemon polish. She titled the first one, "Navigating Menopause with Grace." On the evening of the talk, a meager 5 women showed up. They sat scattered among the chairs, their arms crossed, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and deep-seated skepticism. Rachel stood before them, not behind a podium, but beside it. She didn't begin with a slideshow of hormonal charts or a list of symptoms. Instead, she spoke of the emotional shifts, the spiritual questions that arise when a woman crosses that profound threshold. She spoke of the silence that surrounds women's bodies, a silence so pervasive that it becomes a part of their own internal landscape. A silence taught by mothers and grandmothers, reinforced by a culture that too often equates a woman's value with her youth and fertility. We are handed a script that tells us this chapter of our life is about decline, she said, her voice calm and steady. We're told it's a time of loss, but what if it's not? What if it's an invitation to a deeper, more authentic relationship with ourselves? As she spoke, she saw a flicker of recognition in the eyes of one woman. She was in her early 60s, with soft, silvering hair pulled back from a face etched with the fine lines of a life spent worrying. When the talk concluded, this woman approached her hesitantly, clutching her purse like an anchor. "Dr. Meyers," she began, her voice so low Rachel had to lean in to hear. "What you said about the silence, it felt like you were speaking directly to me. I haven't slept through the night in years. My doctor just gave me pills, but they leave me feeling like I'm walking through fog the next day. It feels," she paused, searching for the right words, "it feels like my own body is working against me." Rachel looked into her eyes and saw the profound exhaustion that she had seen in thousands of women before. It wasn't just a symptom of menopause, it was the cellular level fatigue of a life spent caring for everyone but herself. "Why don't you come by the clinic sometime?" Rachel said gently, her voice devoid of clinical detachment. "We can just talk. No charts, no pressure. Just a conversation." The woman, Eleanor, nodded, a fragile flicker of hope dawning in her tired eyes. As Rachel packed up her notes that evening, the library now quiet and empty, she looked out the window towards the harbour lights. She knew her work in Havenwood had just begun. The quiet, picturesque surface of this town concealed deeper, more turbulent waters. And in the story of Eleanor, she heard the first chapter of a much larger story waiting to be told. Eleanor sat stiffly in one of the clinic's plush armchairs, a stark contrast to the soft cushions designed to invite ease. Her hands, wrinkled and capable, were locked in a white-knuckled grip on the leather handle of her purse, as if it were the only thing keeping her from floating away. She recounted her life in a flat, weary monotone, the words delivered as a report rather than a story. Her days were a relentless cycle of small, demanding tasks dictated by the fading mind of her 90-year-old mother. Mornings were for coaxing her to eat, afternoons for navigating the labyrinth of her confused memories, and evenings for the sundown agitation that left them both frayed and exhausted. Her grown children, though well-meaning, lived hours away, their phone calls filled with loving but ultimately useless advice, their lives a whirlwind of careers and young families that Eleanor felt she could no longer relate to. Her husband, a kind but emotionally distant man, had long ago retreated to the predictable solace of his woodworking shop, the scent of sawdust clinging to him like a shield. But the nights are the hardest, she confessed, her gaze fixed on a point just past Rachel's shoulder. When the house finally falls silent, the loneliness, it's a physical thing. It has a weight. My mind just races. I worry about my mother's health, about our finances, about what will happen to me when she's gone. I feel like I'm constantly vibrating with anxiety. Her voice cracked on the last word, a single crystalline tear escaping to trace a path down her cheek. Rachel listened without interruption, her focus absolute. She didn't take notes or glance at a clock. She simply held the space for Eleanor's story, her warm, intelligent gaze offering a silent testament to its importance. When Eleanor finally fell silent, the quiet in the room was not empty, but filled with empathy. "Eleanor," Rachel began, her voice soft but clear. "Everything you're describing is the body's natural response to chronic stress. Your nervous system is in a constant state of high alert. That vibrating feeling is likely due to an excess of cortisol, the stress hormone, flooding your system. It's what robs you of your sleep and leaves you feeling depleted." She paused, letting the clinical explanation settle. "There are medications that can dampen that response, and sometimes they are necessary. But I want to talk about one of the body's most powerful and most overlooked tools for releasing that stress. It's something that produces a natural cascade of calming chemicals, like oxytocin, often called the bonding hormone, and endorphins, which create a sense of ease and well-being." Eleanor looked confused, her brow furrowed. Rachel continued, choosing her words with deliberate care. "I'm talking about self-pleasure, about masturbation as a form of therapy." A deep, painful blush spread from Eleanor's neck to her hairline. Her eyes darted to the floor, her embarrassment a palpable force in the room. "Oh no," she stammered, shaking her head. I couldn't. I haven't thought about that in decades. It feels selfish, indulgent, with everything else going on. What if we reframed it?" Rachel suggested gently, her tone free of judgment. "What if we saw it not as an indulgence, but as medicine, a way to actively soothe your nervous system and signal to your body that it's safe to rest? Think of it as a conscious act of discharging the day's accumulated tension. 10 minutes of choosing to care for yourself, to let your body release what it has been holding onto so tightly." The idea was radical to Eleanor, a woman raised on a diet of self-sacrifice, taught to believe that her own needs were a luxury to be considered only after everyone else's had been met. Rachel saw the conflict in her face and offered a gentle, practical path forward. She suggested Eleanor start not with a goal, but with simple curiosity. A warm bath, perhaps with scented oils, soft music, the simple act of touching her own skin, her arms, her legs, her stomach, without expectation or guilt. She called it reclaiming your physical self. Eleanor left the clinic in a daze, clutching a small, sample-sized bottle of lavender body oil that Rachel had pressed into her hand. For the next 2 weeks, the bottle sat untouched on her nightstand. The guilt was a thick, suffocating blanket. But one evening, after a particularly difficult day when her mother hadn't recognized her and had lashed out in fear, Eleanor felt a desperate, primal need for a release of any kind. She drew a bath, the steam filling the small room. She poured the lavender oil into the water and, as she sank into the warmth, the fragrance began to work its subtle magic. She closed her eyes and just breathed. Hesitantly, she let her hands trace the lines on her arms, the curve of her shoulders. It felt foreign, unfamiliar, but slowly, as she allowed herself to simply feel the warmth of the water and the silkiness of her own skin, a deep, forgotten warmth began to spread through her. It wasn't about a grand, cinematic climax. It was about a quiet, profound letting go. A wave of release so deep it felt like a sigh from her very soul. That night, for the first time in 5 years, Eleanor slept for 6 uninterrupted hours. She woke to the morning light feeling not groggy or medicated, but rested. When she returned to Rachel's clinic a week later, the change was visible. The tight clench in her jaw had softened, the frantic energy in her eyes had calmed to a gentle hum. "You were right," she said, and a small, wondrous smile touched her lips. "My life is still stressful. That hasn't changed. But now I have a tool, a secret weapon." She looked at Rachel, her eyes shining with newfound understanding. "I call it my reset button." Clara, a widow in her late 60s whose eyes still held the deep ache of grief, came to Dr. Meyers feeling like a ghost in her own life. Since her husband Mark had passed 2 years ago, it wasn't just his presence she missed. It was a part of herself. "It feels like my body has just shut down," she confessed, her voice barely a whisper. Intimacy was a part of our life, and now, even the memory feels painful. Things are uncomfortable. It's like my body has forgotten how to be alive. Rachel listened, recognizing the profound link between grief and physical self. She gently explained the biological changes after menopause, but quickly moved to the second secret. Use it or lose it. "Clara, think of it as physical therapy," Rachel said, her tone both clinical and kind. "Regular arousal brings essential blood flow to the pelvic tissues, keeping them healthy, elastic, and responsive. It's the same principle as walking to keep your legs strong." The idea was jarring for Clara. Alone. "But that was something we shared," she said, the thought feeling like a betrayal. "It feels so lonely." "This isn't about replacing him," Rachel countered softly. "It's about preserving a part of you. It's a way of honoring the vitality you shared by not letting that part of you fade away." This new perspective gave Clara permission to try. Her journey was quiet and deeply personal. It was less about desire and more about rediscovery. Slowly, she learned that her body, though changed, was not broken. It was simply waiting for her attention. Months later, the shift was undeniable. An unexpected improvement in her bladder control was the first physical sign, but the true transformation was deeper. "My body feels like my own again," she told Rachel, a light returning to her eyes. "For 2 years, it has been a vessel of grief. Now, it is simply mine, and it is still alive." She was no longer a fading echo of a life she once had. She was becoming whole again, on her own terms. Just as Eleanor began to feel a sense of equilibrium in her life, a new shadow fell. Her sister, visiting from out of town, made a casual, well-intentioned comment over coffee. "You seem different, Elle. More relaxed. You must finally be getting used to things with Mom." The innocent remark landed like a stone, sending ripples of guilt through the newfound calm in Eleanor's heart. Was she a bad daughter for finding moments of peace, of pleasure, while her mother was adrift in the fog of dementia? The old, ingrained messages of her upbringing resurfaced with a vengeance. A good woman's sacrifices. A caregiver's duty is to be ever vigilant. Her own needs must always come last. The private ritual that had become her reset button suddenly felt like a selfish, shameful betrayal. Her sleep began to fray at the edges again. The familiar vibration of anxiety returned to hum beneath her skin. She avoided her nightly bath, the guilt extinguishing any flicker of desire. Defeated and confused, she scheduled another appointment with Dr. Meyers. "I feel so ashamed," she confessed, her voice thick as she twisted a tissue in her hands. "It feels wrong to feel good, to feel rested, when my mother is suffering so much." Rachel listened, her expression calm and unwavering. "Eleanor," she said, leaning forward slightly, "let me ask you a question. When a plane is in trouble and the oxygen masks drop, what do the flight attendants always tell you to do?" "Put on your own oxygen mask first," Eleanor answered automatically. The phrase, familiar from 100 flights. "Exactly. And why?" "So you can help the person next to you," she whispered, the dawn of understanding beginning to break. "Caring for yourself is not selfish," Rachel said gently but firmly. "It is the most responsible thing you can do as a caregiver. The chronic stress you were under was burning you out. It was making you less patient, less present, less able to cope with the immense challenges you face every day. The sleep you were finally getting, the calm you were feeling, that wasn't just for you. It was for your mother too. It was replenishing the well so that you could continue to give her the loving care she needs from a place of strength, not depletion." She called it the caregiver's paradox. The more you neglect yourself, the less you truly have to give. By prioritizing her own well-being, even for just 10 minutes a day, Eleanor wasn't abandoning her mother. She was becoming a better, more resilient daughter. This new perspective was a revelation. It reframed her self-care not as a guilty pleasure, but as an essential tool for survival. That evening, Eleanor approached her ritual differently. It was no longer a secret escape, but a conscious act of replenishment. As she allowed her body to release the day's tension in the warm, fragrant water, she whispered to herself, "This is for me, so I can be there for her." The shadow of guilt began to recede, replaced by a quiet, fierce resolve. The storm within her life was not gone, but she was finally learning how to be the anchor. Maria came to the clinic at the gentle but persistent urging of her daughter. At 72, she was a pillar of the Havenwood community, a devout churchgoer, a tireless volunteer, a woman who had lived a life of quiet, unimpeachable service. She carried herself with a serene dignity, but her eyes held a deep, unreadable sorrow. Her appointment was for a minor physical ailment, but Rachel sensed a deeper, older story living just beneath the surface. During their conversation, Rachel asked about her life, her marriage to her late husband. Maria spoke of him with respect, but not passion. He was a good man, a good provider. Their life together was built on a foundation of shared faith and mutual duty. When Rachel gently steered the conversation toward intimacy and physical well-being, Maria's carefully constructed composure crumbled. With a shame that seemed to emanate from her very bones, she confessed something she had never told another soul. "Doctor, I have never known," she said, her voice a bare whisper. "I don't know what it feels like. An orgasm." She couldn't meet Rachel's eyes. "I was raised to believe that a woman's body was for her husband, for bearing children. Pleasure, that was not for good women to seek. I was taught it was a sin, so I closed that door. I never even tried to open it." She had lived her entire life feeling that a fundamental part of the human experience had been locked away from her. Now, in the twilight of her years, she was filled with a profound and silent regret. "Is it too late for me?" she asked, her eyes finally lifting, pleading, "Have I missed my chance?" "Maria," Rachel said, her voice infused with a powerful warmth and conviction, "it is never, ever too late. Your body is still yours. Pleasure is your birthright, not something you have to earn. It does not have an expiration date. This was the third secret, and for Maria, it was the most important. Her journey was not about technique. It was a spiritual and emotional excavation. Rachel guided her with immense care, suggesting she begin not with her body, but with her mind. She gave her poetry by women who celebrated their sensuality, gentle guides to mindfulness, and encouraged her to simply spend time with herself. The first step was an act of profound courage, for Maria to look at her own aging body in the mirror without judgment, to see not the wrinkles and age spots, but the strong, resilient vessel that had carried her through 72 years of life. Her physical exploration began weeks later, with the simple act of applying scented lotion after her shower. She learned the geography of her own skin, the places that felt sensitive, the textures, the temperatures. There was no goal, no pressure. It was a slow, meditative process of introduction. She was meeting herself for the first time. One warm afternoon, months into her journey, she was sitting in her sun-drenched garden. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves, and the scent of roses filled the air. She placed a hand on her heart, then let it drift downwards over her stomach. With a sense of pure, innocent curiosity, free from the dogma of her youth, she allowed herself to touch, to explore. And there, in the safety of her own garden, with the sun on her face, she felt it. A gentle, surprising, and utterly joyful wave of pleasure that started deep within and radiated through her entire body. Tears streamed down her face, not of sadness or regret, but of pure, unadulterated release. She felt a connection to her body, to nature, to the divine, that she had never imagined possible. At her next appointment, she didn't need to say a word. Her face was radiant. "I feel alive," she told Rachel, her voice clear and strong. "I feel like God gave me this body as a gift, and I'm only just now learning how to open it. I only wish I hadn't waited so long." "The past is the past," Rachel smiled. "What matters is that the door is open now." Susan, a sharp, witty woman of 58, burst into Rachel's office like a whirlwind of vibrant energy and nervous chatter. Recently divorced after a 30-year marriage, she was navigating the bewildering, often comical, world of dating in her 50s. "I feel like a teenager again, and not in a good way," she declared, collapsing dramatically into a chair. "My body has changed. Things don't respond the way they used to. Arousal takes longer, and it's fainter. I'm so self-conscious. I went on a date with a lovely man, but I was so terrified of being a physical disappointment that I practically fled the restaurant." She was ashamed of the natural evolution of her body, viewing it as a personal failure. Rachel listened, and then brought up the fourth secret. "Susan, what if you had a tool to help with that? Something to provide consistent, reliable stimulation to help awaken your body's responses." "You mean a vibrator?" Susan asked, her face scrunching up in distaste. "Oh, goodness, no. Those are for, I don't know, lonely, desperate women in bad movies. They're toys." "It feels so pathetic." "Let's reframe that," Rachel countered smoothly. "We don't think reading glasses are pathetic when our eyes need help focusing. We don't think a heating pad is desperate when our muscles are sore. A vibrator is not a toy. It is a tool of health. It's a practical support that helps your body function the way it's meant to, especially when hormonal changes have shifted the landscape." This pragmatic, health-focused approach intrigued Susan. She was a practical woman, but Rachel knew this was about more than just a physical tool. It was about the fifth and most crucial secret: breaking the taboo and claiming her freedom. "The shame you feel, Susan," Rachel said, "was given to you. You were taught that your pleasure and your body's needs were somehow embarrassing. By taking your pleasure into your own hands, literally, you stop seeing yourself as a potential disappointment to someone else. You become whole and complete on your own." Giving herself permission to buy a vibrator became an act of rebellion for Susan. She bought one online, feeling a thrill of defiance. Using it for the first time was awkward, but she focused on Rachel's words. "This is a tool for my health. This is an act of self-care." The device did exactly what Rachel said it would, helping her rediscover sensations she thought were lost. But the real change was emotional. It rebuilt her confidence in her body's ability to respond, and in doing so, it freed her. She went on another date with the same lovely man. This time, she was relaxed, funny, and utterly herself, radiating a self-assurance that was far more attractive than any youthful physique. She was free. The transformations in Havenwood were quiet but profound, and they rippled outward, touching the lives of others. Eleanor, no longer running on the fumes of exhaustion, found a deeper well of patience for her mother. Her husband, drawn to her newfound calm, began to seek her out, not for logistics about his mother-in-law, but for her company. Their evening walks became a ritual, and the emotional connection she had craved for years began to rekindle. Clara joined a local hiking group, her renewed physical confidence carrying her up the coastal trails. She found friendship and laughter, and discovered a passion for photography, her lens capturing the rugged beauty of the world around her. Her life was no longer defined by her loss, but by her own emerging passions. Maria's change was astonishing. She started a mindful moments group at her church, guiding other older women in simple meditation. She never spoke explicitly of her journey, but the women who attended felt her profound sense of peace and self-acceptance, and it was contagious. And Susan, bold and liberated, started a book club for single women her age. They read books on empowerment, health, and sexuality, sharing stories and laughter, dismantling decades of shame in the safety of their circle. Dr. Meyers watched these ripples with a deep sense of fulfillment. Her small clinic had become the center of a quiet revolution, proving that when one woman reclaims her power, she illuminates the path for others. One crisp autumn evening, Rachel sat at her desk, the lights of the Havenwood harbor twinkling outside her window. She looked at the files on her desk. Eleanor, Clara, Maria, Susan. They weren't just patients, they were stories of resilience, courage, and rebirth. She thought about the vast, unspoken sea of women just like them, in every town and city, who had been made to believe their best years were behind them. She realized her work was bigger than this one clinic, this one town. She had to find a way to break the silence on a larger scale. She opened her laptop and began to write. She didn't write a medical paper. She began to write a story for every woman who had ever been told that her pleasure was shameful, that her body was no longer valuable, that her joy didn't matter. She wrote down the 5 secrets, weaving in the courage of Eleanor, the healing of Clara, the discovery of Maria, and the liberation of Susan, protecting their privacy, but preserving the powerful truth of their experiences. As the first light of dawn broke over the harbor, she typed the final sentence: "Your story is not finished. It is just beginning. And the next chapter can be the most radiant one yet." She closed her laptop, a deep sense of peace settling over her. The silence was ending. A new conversation, one of dignity, power, and unapologetic joy, was about to begin. So, here we are at the end of our story for today. We've walked alongside Eleanor, Clara, Maria, and Susan, and I hope their journeys have resonated with you in some way. Remember, your age is not a barrier. It is an invitation. Each year of your life has given you wisdom, strength, and resilience. And those qualities can fuel a richer, more authentic connection with your body than you ever had in your youth. You are not broken, you are not invisible. You are still here, and you are still worthy of joy. The moment you give yourself permission to embrace your own pleasure is the moment you reclaim your body, your confidence, and your freedom. These secrets are not just about intimacy. They are about living more fully, breathing more deeply, and stepping into this chapter of your life with dignity and power. Thank you for spending this time with me. I hope you carry these truths forward. Until next time, be well and be kind to yourself.